see the way you shine. Take your hand, my dear, and place them both in mine. You know you stopped me dead while I was passing by. And now I beg to see you dance just one more time. Ooh, I see you.
Let's go over our objective for today. Mir, I can determine the author's use of word choice in character development. Mirror off. Now the focus question for today, boys and girls, the question that we're going to be able to answer at the end. So why do you think Daw decided to make Miss Trunchbull a hammer throw champion? How does that sport emphasize what makes her powerful? Let's go ahead and watch a video of the hammer throw. Now that we watched the video, boys and girls, choose 3 adjectives to describe a successful hammer throw athlete. So adjectives are words that describe something. For example, this is a floral cup. Floral is what describes this cup. Now, imagine I had a heavy dog. Ugh. This is my heavy dog. Heavy is the adjective that describes my dog. Go ahead and do your do now right now. Now that you're done, let's go ahead and look at our focus question again. So, this is a question we're going to be able to answer at the end of our lesson. Why do you think Daw decided to make Miss Trunchbull a hammer throw champion? How does that sport emphasize what makes her powerful? Let's go ahead and go over some vocabulary words before we get started with our lesson. Mirror on. Paralyzed. An inability to move or powerless. Twit. Idiot. Before reading our novel, boys and girls, I want you guys to think about Miss Trunchbull. Describe Miss Trunchbull. So, who is she? What does she look like? How does she behave? Listen to this then, Hortensia said. Only yesterday the Trunchbull caught a boy named Julius Rotwinkle eating licorice all sorts during the scripture lesson. And she simply picked him up by one arm and flung him clear out of the open classroom window. Our classroom is 1 floor up, and we saw Julius Rotwinkle go sailing out over the garden like a frisbee and landing with a thump in the middle of the lettuce. Then the Trunchbull turned to us and said, "From now on, anybody caught eating in class goes straight out the window." Did this Julius Rotwinkle break any bones? Lavender asked. Only a few, Hortensia said. You've got to remember that the Trunchbull once threw the hammer for Britain in the Olympics, so she is very proud of her right arm. What's throwing the hammer? Lavender asked. The hammer, Hortensia said, is actually a ruddy great cannonball on the end of a long bit of wire, and the thrower whisks it round and round his or her head faster and faster, and then lets it go. You have to be terrifically strong. The Trunchbull will throw anything around just to keep her arm in, especially children. Good heavens, Lavender said. So, boys and girls, we just learned that Miss Trunchbull is a hammer thrower, just like the females that we saw in the video for the Olympics. Now, thinking about the women that we saw in the video, why do you think Daw decided to make Miss Trunchbull a hammer throw champion? Now, what does this tell us about Miss Trunchbull? Give an example of how Miss Trunchbull uses her hammer throw power. Hortensia tells Matilda and Lavender that Miss Trunchbull keeps her athletic ability by throwing things around with her right arm, especially children. Now, if I think about it, this is another way that she punishes these children. Now, this is going to get us to think, boys and girls. It's going to help us answer why Daw makes Miss Trunchbull a hammer throw champion. Once I heard her say, Hortensia went on, that a large boy is about the same weight as an Olympic hammer. And therefore, he's very useful for practicing with. At this illustration, boys and girls, what do you guys notice? At that point, something strange happened. The playground, which up to then had been filled with shrieks and the shouting of children at play, all at once became silent as the grave. "Watch out!" Hortensia whispered. Matilda and Lavender glanced round and saw the gigantic figure of Miss Trunchbull advancing through the crowd of boys and girls with menacing strides. The children drew back hastily to let her through, and her progress across the asphalt was like that of Moses going through the Red Sea when the waters parted. A formidable figure she was too. In her belted smock and green breeches below the knees, her calf muscles stood out like grapefruits inside her stockings. "Amanda Thripp!" she was shouting. "You, Amanda Thripp, come here!" "Hold your hats," Hortensia whispered. "What's going to happen?" Lavender whispered back. "That idiot," Hortensia said, "has let her hair grow even longer during the halls, and her mother has plaited it into pigtails. Silly thing to do." "Why silly?" Matilda asked. "There's one thing that Trunchbull can't stand. It's pigtails," Hortensia said. Matilda and Lavender saw the giant in green breeches advancing upon a girl of about 10 who had a pair of plaited golden pigtails hanging over her shoulders. Each pigtail had a blue satin bow at the top of it, and it all looked very pretty. The girl wearing the pigtails, Amanda Thripp, stood quite still, watching the advancing giant, and the expression on her face was one that you might find on the face of a person who is certain that the day of judgment had come for her at last. Wow, we can literally imagine what's happening here. I want you guys to close your eyes right now as I read this again, and I want you guys to imagine everything that is happening. "Hold your hats," Hortensia whispered. "What's going to happen?" Lavender whispered back. "That idiot," Hortensia said, "has let her hair grow even longer during the halls, and her mother has plaited it into pigtails. Silly thing to do." "Why silly?" Matilda asked. "There's one thing that Trunchbull can't stand. It's pigtails," Hortensia said. Matilda and Lavender saw the giant in green breeches advancing upon a girl of about 10 who had a pair of plaited golden pigtails hanging over her shoulders. Each pigtail had a blue satin bow at the top of it, and it all looked very pretty. The girl wearing the pigtails, Amanda Thripp, stood quite still, watching the advancing giant, and the expression on her face was one that you might find on the face of a person who is certain that the day of judgment had come for her at last. What do you guys predict is going to happen, and why? How does Amanda Thripp feel? And how do you know? Miss Trunchbull had now reached the victim and stood towering over her. "I want those filthy pigtails off before you come back to school tomorrow," she barked. chop them off and throw them in the dustbin. You understand? Amanda, paralyzed with fright, managed to stutter. My mommy likes them. She plates them for me every morning. Your mummy's a wit, the Trunchbull bellowed. She pointed a finger the size of a salami at the child's head and shouted, You look like a rat with the tail coming out of its head. Mummy thinks I look lovely, Miss Trunchbull, Amanda stuttered, shaking like a blancmange. I don't give a tinker's toot what your mummy thinks, the Trunchbull yelled. And with that, she lunged forward and grabbed hold of Amanda's pigtails in her right fist and lifted the girl clear off the ground. Then she started swinging her round and round her head, faster and faster, and Amanda was screaming blue murder, and the Trunchbull was yelling, I'll give you pigtails, you little rat! Shades of the Olympics, Hortensia murmured. She's getting up speed, now just like she does with the hammer. 10 to 1, she's going to throw her. And now the Trunchbull was leaning back against the weight of the whirling girl and pivoted expertly on her toes, spinning round and round, and soon Amanda Thripp was traveling so fast she became a blur, and suddenly, with a mighty grunt, the Trunchbull let go of the pigtails, and Amanda went sailing like a rocket right over the wire fence of the playground and high up into the sky. No, sir! Someone shouted from across the playground, and Matilda, who was mesmerized by the whole crazy affair, saw Amanda Thripp descending in a long, graceful parabola onto the playing field beyond. She landed on the grass and bounced 3 times and finally came to rest. Then, amazingly, she sat up. She looked a trifle dazed, and who could blame her? But after a minute or so, she was on her feet again and tottering back towards the playground. The Trunchbull stood in the playground, dusting off her hands. Not bad, she said, considering I'm not in strict training. Not bad at all. Then she strode away. She's mad, Hortensia said. But don't the parents complain? Matilda asked. Would yours? Hortensia asked. I know mine wouldn't. She treats the mothers and fathers just the same as the children, and they're all scared to death of her. I'll be seeing you sometime, you two. And with that, she sauntered away. How does the sport of hammer throwing emphasize Miss Trunchbull's power over the kids at Crunchum Hall? So think about it. We know that Miss Trunchbull is an Olympic hammer thrower. Now, how is her being an Olympic hammer thrower make her have power over the students?